The day I found out my parents weren't who they said they were. I had always thought I knew who my parents were. They were the people who raised me, the ones who taught me right from wrong, who put me through school and celebrated every birthday with me. In my mind, they were perfect. I trusted them more than anyone in the world, but one simple phone call turned that all upside down. One phone call made me question everything. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. I had just gotten back from work that day. It was a typical evening, nothing special. I was looking forward to a quiet dinner with my parents, catching up on the week, maybe even relaxing and watching some Netflix. But as soon as I walked through the door, I could sense that something was off. The air felt heavier, almost tense. My parents were sitting at the kitchen table, their faces unusually serious. It felt like the calm before a storm, like something big was about to happen. "Hey, you okay?" I asked, trying to break the silence. But they didn't respond right away. My mom just looked at me with a faint smile, but I could tell something was bothering her. Dad, on the other hand, was looking down at his phone, his fingers tapping nervously. My stomach tightened. "Is everything all right?" I repeated, this time a little more concerned. My mom sighed and motioned for me to sit down. "We need to talk," she said softly, her voice shaky. That sentence alone was enough to set off 1,000 alarms in my head. "What's going on?" I asked, now standing at the edge of the table. My dad finally looked up at me. "It's about your birth," he said, his voice unusually quiet. "About where you come from." The words didn't make sense. What was he talking about? "What do you mean?" "What about my birth?" I asked, my confusion growing by the second. This was the last thing I expected to hear. My mom was suddenly the one to speak, her voice trembling. "Honey, there's something we've been keeping from you. Something important. Something we should have told you a long time ago." I was starting to feel a pit form in my stomach. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew deep down that this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. "What is it, Mom?" I asked, the unease now creeping into my voice. She took a deep breath, looking at my dad for reassurance before she continued. "We're not your real parents." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight, and it felt like the floor was about to drop out from under me. I could feel my heart race, my mind scrambling to process what she had just said. "What? What do you mean?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "We adopted you when you were a baby," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We've always loved you like our own, but we've never been able to tell you the full truth." Why are you telling me this now?" I stammered. I had always felt so secure in my family, so safe in the life we had. This wasn't a secret, this wasn't something I had ever questioned, so why now? Why was everything I thought I knew suddenly a lie? "Because we got a call today," Dad finally spoke up. "It was from a lawyer. They've found your biological parents." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't understand it. The whole world I had known felt like it was crumbling around me. "What do you mean they found them? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I could barely catch my breath. I wanted to understand, but my mind couldn't process everything at once. "We wanted to tell you," my mom said, wiping away a tear. "We just didn't know how. We didn't want to hurt you, and we didn't want you to feel like you weren't ours. You've always been our child." But it wasn't the same, was it? Nothing would ever be the same again. I was trying to hold it together, to not fall apart in front of them, but it felt impossible. Everything had changed in an instant. "We just wanted you to be happy," my dad said, his voice breaking. "We didn't know what to do. We were afraid of what this would do to you." I didn't know what to say. What do you say when your whole life feels like it's been turned upside down? The people you thought you knew better than anyone are suddenly strangers, and the truth you've relied on your entire life is shattered. There were so many questions, so many emotions swirling inside me, but I didn't know where to start. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" was the only thing that escaped my lips. My mom shook her head, looking so regretful. "We thought you were happy. We thought you were safe. We didn't know how to bring this up without ruining everything." The anger inside me was growing, but it wasn't aimed at them. It wasn't their fault, not exactly. They were just trying to protect me. I understood that, but it didn't stop the flood of emotions that came crashing over me. How could they have kept something like this from me for so long? What else had they kept from me? I didn't know if I could ever look at them the same way again. The room felt suffocating, and all I wanted was to run, to escape from the overwhelming swirl of emotions. But I stayed, frozen, my mind spinning in a million different directions. "What now?" I asked quietly, barely above a whisper. My voice sounded like someone else's, like I wasn't even in control of it. "The lawyer said your biological parents want to meet you," my dad said, glancing at my mom, then back at me. "They've been looking for you, and they want to talk." The idea hit me like a freight train. My real parents. Were they even real to me? Could they be real now? A part of me felt a strange sense of curiosity. I wondered what they were like. I wondered why they had given me up. Did they regret it? Did they even think about me all these years? But another part of me felt betrayed, like I had been living a lie so big I couldn't comprehend it. I stared at my parents, the people who raised me, the people I trusted with my life, and I felt so distant, like we were strangers. "I need some time," I said, my voice cracking slightly. I didn't know if I was talking to them or to myself. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, heading straight for my room. The door clicked shut behind me, and I collapsed onto my bed, burying my face in my hands. I couldn't breathe. How could they do this? I couldn't understand how they could keep such a huge part of my life hidden. Was it because they didn't trust me, or was it because they were ashamed of my birth parents? 100 different scenarios ran through my mind, each one worse than the last. But the most terrifying thing was the thought that I didn't know who I really was anymore. Everything I had ever known, everything that made me me, now seemed like it could be false. Who was I? Was I their daughter? Was I someone else's? Was I ever truly their child? After an hour of staring at the ceiling and replaying the conversation over and over, I finally stood up. I had to clear my head. I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through social media, hoping for a distraction, but it wasn't long before the notifications started flooding in. Texts, calls, and even posts. My phone was blowing up. Most were from my best friend, Kara. "Hey, just wanted to check in," her message said. "I heard about what happened with your parents. Do you want to talk?" I quickly typed back. "Yeah, I do." Moments later, Kara called me, and I answered, not caring about the tightness in my chest or the tears that had started to form in my eyes. "What's going on, girl?" she asked, her voice calm but concerned. "I don't know," I said, my voice breaking. I found out today that my parents aren't my real parents." I could feel the words hang in the air, like they didn't belong to me. "Wait, what?" Kara exclaimed. "They told you? Why? Why now?" I explained everything. The lawyer's call, the revelation, how I felt like I didn't know who I was anymore. Kara was silent for a moment, and then she said, "I don't know what you're going through, but I know this. It doesn't change the person you are. It doesn't change how I see you, and it doesn't change who your family is either. You're still you." "But how can I be? How can I be the same person after all this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "I don't know," Kara said softly. "But what I do know is that you haven't changed. You're still you, and I think you need to give yourself some time to figure it out." "I don't even know where to start," I said. "I feel like everything's falling apart." "Maybe it's not falling apart," Kara suggested. "Maybe it's just falling into place. You're going to figure this out, one step at a time." Her words didn't fix everything, but they did bring a tiny bit of comfort. Maybe it wasn't the end of the world. Maybe this was just another chapter in the story of my life. I wasn't sure yet, but it gave me a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could find my way through this. After I hung up with Kara, I sat in silence for a while, trying to make sense of everything. My mind was still a mess, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to meet my biological parents. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I couldn't ignore the curiosity eating away at me. I needed to understand, to hear their side of the story. Why had they left me? Why didn't they fight to keep me? The next morning, my parents were waiting for me when I came downstairs. They looked anxious, like they were expecting me to explode. But I wasn't angry, not yet. I was too confused. "I want to meet them," I said flatly, breaking the silence. They both looked at me in surprise, like they hadn't expected me to be so calm. "Are you sure?" my dad asked. "It's a big step." "I have to know," I replied. "I need answers." My mom reached out and touched my arm. "We'll support whatever you decide. We didn't want to hurt you." I nodded. I knew they meant well, but the damage was done. It wasn't about what they had done wrong. It was about what I needed now. I spent the next few days in a daze. Everything was a blur, and it felt like my entire world was spinning out of control. The thought of meeting my biological parents was both terrifying and strangely comforting. I couldn't stop thinking about them, about who they were, about why they hadn't been there when I needed them the most. I tried to prepare myself, but nothing could really get me ready for what was about to happen. The lawyer called on Thursday afternoon and told me that they had set up a meeting for the following day. I had agreed, of course. There was no turning back now. It's just a meeting, I kept telling myself, trying to calm my nerves. Just a meeting. But nothing felt just about it. The day arrived faster than I thought it would. My parents were clearly just as nervous as I was. My mom had been pacing back and forth all morning, and my dad was unusually quiet. I could tell they were trying to act normal, but I could also see the worry in their eyes. They were scared of what would happen next, just like I was. They didn't know if I would come back from the meeting with answers or with more questions. As the time drew closer, I started to feel that knot in my stomach tightening. I was about to meet people who were supposed to be my parents, but weren't. People I didn't know, who didn't know me. There was so much at stake. What if I didn't like them? What if they weren't the people I imagined? What if they didn't want me? My mind raced with worst-case scenarios, but there was no going back. We drove to the lawyer's office and I stayed quiet in the back seat, my hands folded tightly in my lap. The building looked unassuming, like any other office building, but the weight of what was about to happen felt heavy. I could barely breathe. As we stepped out of the car, I felt my knees shaking. My mom and dad both reached out to me at the same time, offering silent support. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," my dad said, his voice full of concern. But I shook my head. "I need to know. I need to meet them." The three of us walked into the building together. The lawyer greeted us in the lobby, a kind-looking man in his late 40s who immediately put me at ease with his warm smile. "You're here for the meeting," he said, his voice calm. "Your birth parents are here too. They're nervous, but they're ready to meet you." He led us to a small conference room at the back of the building. The moment we walked inside, I saw them, a couple, sitting across from each other. They were older than I expected, in their late 40s or early 50s. The man had kind eyes, dark hair starting to gray at the temples. The woman had a similar look to me, with the same brown hair and hazel eyes. There was a sense of familiarity, even though I had never seen them before. They both stood up when we entered, their faces full of nervous anticipation. The woman's eyes immediately welled up with tears. "I can't believe this is really happening," she whispered. The man reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We never thought we'd get this chance." I stood frozen in place for a moment, unsure of what to say. The lawyer gently urged me to sit down. My parents took seats next to me, their hands resting on the table, still unsure how to react. "I know this must be overwhelming," the man said, his voice thick with emotion. "But we wanted to tell you how sorry we are for not being there for you. We made a mistake, and we've regretted it every day." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. The woman looked at me, her eyes full of regret. "We never wanted to hurt you," she said softly. We weren't ready to be parents. We thought you'd have a better life without us." The words sounded so familiar, like something out of a movie, but hearing them come from the people who had given me life was like hearing a truth I had never known. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to scream at them, to tell them how much it hurt to be abandoned. But another part of me just wanted to understand. "Why?" was the only word I could get out. "Why did you leave me?" The woman wiped away a tear before answering. "We were young and we were scared. We didn't know what we were doing. We couldn't give you the life you deserved." Her voice broke as she spoke. "But that doesn't mean we didn't love you. We never stopped thinking about you every single day." The man nodded. "We've spent years trying to find you. We never gave up." I didn't know what to say. How could I? How could I take in everything they were saying when my mind was still reeling from the shock of it all? I wasn't angry, not yet, but I wasn't sure I could forgive them. I wasn't sure I wanted to. "I need time," I said finally, my voice thick with emotion. "I need time to process all of this." The woman nodded, her face full of understanding. "We understand," she said softly. "We just wanted you to know the truth. We wanted you to know that we never stopped caring about you." The lawyer gently cleared his throat. "I think this might be a good time for us to step out and give you all some space." As the lawyer and my parents left the room, I sat there in silence with them. It felt like everything had changed in that moment, but I didn't know how to move forward. My biological parents were sitting right there, but I didn't know how to feel about them. I didn't know what I was supposed to do now. I sat there, lost in thought, the silence hanging heavy between us. The man and the woman, my biological parents, were watching me, their faces full of hope and apprehension. I could hear the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, but it felt like the seconds were stretching out, pulling everything along with them. The overwhelming mix of emotions made it hard to breathe. They were right in front of me, the people who had given me life, and yet I felt as though they were strangers. I couldn't get rid of that feeling. I wanted so badly to know them, but the walls I had built up over the years were impossible to tear down in an instant. They didn't understand the years of confusion, the years of wondering who I really was, and the years of feeling like a piece of me was missing. No one had been able to fill that void, until now. But what did it all mean? What was I supposed to do with this information? The woman, my biological mother, was the first to speak again. "You don't have to say anything right now," she said softly, her voice full of understanding. "We know we've put a lot on you today, and we don't want to rush anything. We just wanted you to know that we're here. We're not going anywhere." Her words felt like a weight on my chest. She was offering me a chance to rebuild something that had been broken long ago, but I didn't know if I was ready to accept it. I wasn't sure if I ever would be, but I couldn't ignore the fact that a part of me wanted to try. I looked at them, really looked at them, and for the first time, I saw them not just as strangers, but as people. They weren't perfect. They had made mistakes, huge ones, but they were still my parents in some way. It was hard to accept, but I couldn't deny it. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "I don't know if I can just pick up where we left off. I've lived my whole life with my other parents. They raised me. They're the ones who've been there for me." "We understand," the man said, his voice full of regret. "We're not asking you to forget everything. We're not asking you to replace them. We just want a chance to be a part of your life, even if it's just a small part." His words hit me harder than I expected. A small part. Could I give them that? Could I give them a chance without feeling like I was betraying the people who had raised me? "I don't know," I said, shaking my head. "I just need more time." The woman nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. "Take all the time you need," she said softly. "We'll be here when you're ready. We just wanted to let you know that we never stopped thinking about you, and we never stopped loving you." My chest tightened at her words, and for the first time since I'd walked into the room, I felt like I might actually believe them. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe there was room for all of us, even if I didn't have the answers yet. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was more like a quiet understanding, a mutual respect that we all needed time to process what had just happened. I didn't know what the future would look like, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel entirely alone. I didn't feel like I was the only one carrying the weight of everything. We could figure this out together, step by step. Slowly, I stood up from my chair. The motion was stiff, as though I was still unsure of everything. But as I looked at them one more time, I realized something. I wasn't sure about anything right now, but I could try. I could start to rebuild the pieces of my life that had been scattered, broken, and hidden away. "I'm not ready to have you in my life yet," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "But I want to get there. I'll try. I don't know how long it will take, but I'll try." The woman's face softened into a small smile, and the man's eyes shone with tears. "That's all we can ask for," he said quietly. "Thank you." I took a deep breath, feeling the tension in my body start to ease, just a little. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't a fairy tale reunion, but it was real, and sometimes real was enough. As I walked out of the room with my parents by my side, I felt something shift inside me. The weight wasn't gone, but it was a little lighter, and I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone in this anymore. The days that followed were a blur. I spent a lot of time thinking about the meeting, replaying the conversation over and over in my head. There were moments when I felt ready to reach out to my biological parents and others, when I felt the weight of the decision too heavily. I couldn't just jump into a relationship with them after everything that had happened. It was like learning to walk again. I had to take things one step at a time. My parents, my adoptive parents, were supportive but cautious. They didn't want to push me into anything, but they also made it clear that they were there for me, no matter what. The love they had for me was unwavering, and that comforted me more than anything. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. It wasn't easy for me either. My mind was constantly torn between wanting to understand who these new people were and not wanting to hurt the people who had raised me. How could I balance these two worlds that felt so different? The day I decided to call my biological mother was the hardest one yet. I had spent so many nights imagining the conversation, but when it actually came time to dial the number, my hands were shaking. I took a deep breath and pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Hello?" Her voice was soft, almost nervous. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment. "Hi, it's me. I've been thinking about what we talked about, and I want to try. I don't know how or when, but I want to get to know you." The words felt awkward coming out of my mouth, but it was the truth. I wanted to take the first step, even if it was small. There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear her trying to keep her emotions in check. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I've waited for this day for so long. Thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance." I could hear the tears in her voice, and a lump formed in my throat. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing, but at that moment, I knew I had to try. I needed answers, and they were only going to come from taking this step. We talked for a few more minutes, setting up a time to meet again. We agreed to take things slow, to see where this new relationship could go. I hung up the phone with mixed feelings, relieved, uncertain, and yet hopeful. The next few weeks passed in a blur of phone calls, texts, and awkward meetings. Every time I saw them, my biological parents, it felt like I was stepping into someone else's life. They were trying, but I was still figuring out how to fit them into mine. There were moments when it felt like nothing had changed, like I was just a regular kid again. And then there were moments when I felt like I was losing everything I had ever known. It was hard to reconcile these two parts of me, the person I had been and the person I was becoming. One day, after a long week of back and forth texting with my biological mother, she suggested we all go out for lunch. My adoptive parents agreed, though I could tell they were nervous. They didn't know what to expect, just like me. It was the first time I had to introduce my two sets of parents to each other, and the weight of it felt like 1,000 pounds. As we sat down at the restaurant, I noticed the tension in the air. My adoptive parents were polite, of course, but I could tell they were unsure about how to interact with my biological parents. They were trying, but there was this invisible wall between them, built out of years of uncertainty and unspoken words. "So, what do you do for work?" my mom asked, trying to break the silence. "Oh, I'm a nurse," my biological mother replied, smiling softly. "I've been working in pediatric care for about 15 years now." The conversation flowed from there, slowly at first, like we were all strangers getting to know each other. But as the afternoon went on, I started to see something different. My adoptive parents began to open up, asking more questions, talking more freely. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I could see the shift, the tentative reaching out. It made me feel like there was hope for all of us, even if it wasn't easy. I watched as my adoptive mother and my biological mother exchanged smiles, and for the first time, I realized something. They weren't enemies. They were two women who loved me, even if they loved me in different ways. And that was okay. It didn't mean I had to choose between them. I could have both. I didn't know what the future held, but at that moment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I could see the path ahead of me, and I knew it was going to be messy, complicated, and sometimes heartbreaking. But I also knew that I wasn't alone. I had my adoptive parents who had always been there for me, and I had my biological parents who were trying their best to make up for lost time. And maybe that was enough for now. It was all I could ask for. Slowly, we all finished our meals and said our goodbyes, but this time, it didn't feel final. It felt like an opening, a door cracked just enough to allow the light in. We weren't there yet, but we were moving in the right direction. Over the next few months, things began to settle into a rhythm. It wasn't perfect by any means. There were still awkward silences and moments of uncertainty, but there was also something deeper. A connection was beginning to form. I saw my biological parents a few more times, and each visit felt a little easier. The first time I hugged my biological mother, I wasn't sure how to react. My adoptive mother had always been the one to hold me, to offer comfort when I was upset. And now, here I was, hugging this woman who shared my DNA but not my history. It felt strange, but in a way, it felt right. Slowly, the lines between my two worlds began to blur. I still spent most of my time with my adoptive parents, and that wasn't going to change. They were the ones who had been there for me through every milestone, every tear, every triumph. But I also started to understand that there was room in my heart for my biological parents too. They weren't replacements, they were additions. For a while, I struggled with guilt. It felt like I was betraying my adoptive parents by allowing my biological parents back into my life. But as time went on, I realized that love wasn't a limited resource. There was no rule that said I had to choose one family over the other. I could love them both in different ways, and that was okay. The day I realized this was the day I finally let go of the guilt that had been weighing me down. I had dinner with my adoptive parents one evening, and we talked about how things had been going with my biological parents. My adoptive mom asked, "How are you feeling about everything? Is it still hard for you?" I paused for a moment, thinking about the question. It wasn't hard anymore. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't hard. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm figuring it out. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm starting to think that's okay. I think I can love them both, and that's all I need to know right now." My adoptive dad smiled, a warm, understanding look in his eyes. "You're not betraying us," he said quietly. "We just want you to be happy. We'll always be here for you, no matter what." I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was like a weight had been lifted off my chest. My adoptive parents were supportive in a way I hadn't expected, and that made all the difference. I wasn't alone in this anymore. In a way, I had the best of both worlds. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how lucky I was. I had two families who cared about me. Not everyone got that. Not everyone got a chance to rewrite their story, to give people second chances, to rebuild relationships that had once seemed lost. I had that opportunity, and I wasn't going to take it for granted. One weekend, my biological parents invited me to spend the day with them. We went to the park, had a picnic, and just talked. It was simple, but it felt like something special. As we sat on the grass, laughing and eating sandwiches, I couldn't help but smile. This was it. This was what I had been looking for. A place where I could be myself, where I could embrace both parts of my life without feeling torn. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. The next few months were filled with little moments like that. Moments of connection, moments of understanding, and moments of healing. I began to realize that while I had spent so much time trying to figure out who I was, the answer was simpler than I thought. I was both of them. I was the child of my adoptive parents, and I was the child of my biological parents. Both were true, and neither was more important than the other. They were just different pieces of me, and I was learning to accept that. And so, with each passing day, I grew a little more comfortable in my own skin. The road ahead was still long, and there were still challenges to face, but I no longer felt like I was walking it alone. I had two families, two sets of love, and the chance to build something new. Maybe that was enough after all. I was ready to see where it would take me. The next year passed in a blur, but in the best possible way. I spent time with my biological parents more frequently, getting to know them as people rather than just the people who had brought me into this world. And with every visit, every conversation, the walls I had built began to come down piece by piece. It was still a bit awkward at times, but there was something about it that felt genuine, something real about the connections we were forming. I began to understand them better, too. My biological mother was an artist, creative and free-spirited, in a way that I had always envied in others, but never quite understood. My biological father, on the other hand, was quiet and reserved, but had a warmth about him that made me feel like I mattered. I found myself learning things about myself through them, traits I hadn't known I shared with them. It was like piecing together a puzzle that had been missing for so long. I learned that I loved art, just like my mother, and I had my father's quiet patience when it came to dealing with tough situations. It wasn't just about genetics, though. It was about the relationships we were building together, about forming bonds that had been missing for so long. One evening, as I sat with my biological parents in their living room, something clicked. I wasn't just visiting them. I was a part of their lives now, and they were a part of mine. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't a perfect reunion, but it was real, and that was more than I could have ever hoped for. My adoptive parents had always been the ones who were there for me. They were the ones who had wiped my tears, cheered me on through my successes, and held me when I was broken. But now, I had something else, too. I had my biological parents who were trying to make up for lost time, who were showing me that it wasn't too late to build a relationship, even after all these years. It wasn't easy, though. There were times when I still felt conflicted, when I wondered if I was being fair to everyone involved. I still loved my adoptive parents fiercely, and I didn't want them to feel like I was replacing them. But I had come to understand that love wasn't a zero-sum game. I could love them both, in different ways. They were both a part of me, and I didn't have to choose. I remember one day sitting down with my adoptive mom and telling her about the progress I'd made with my biological parents. She listened quietly, her eyes filled with emotion. "You know," she said softly, "I never wanted you to feel torn between us. I just want you to be happy. And if being happy means having both of us in your life, then that's what I want too." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized how much I had been holding back, how much I had been afraid of letting my adoptive parents down. But in that moment, I understood something that had always been there but hadn't fully clicked. My adoptive parents wanted what was best for me. They had always wanted me to have a full and happy life, and if that meant sharing me with my biological parents, they were okay with that. In a way, it felt like a weight had been lifted. I didn't have to carry the burden of choosing anymore. I could have both families, and they could have me. It wasn't going to be perfect. There would always be awkward moments, there would always be challenges to overcome, but I was okay with that. I was learning that family wasn't about perfection. It was about love, and love could come in many forms. A few months later, my adoptive parents invited my biological parents to our house for Thanksgiving. It felt like a big step, and I was nervous, unsure of how it would go. But when we all sat down at the table together, something incredible happened. There was no tension, no awkwardness. It felt normal. It felt right. We shared stories, laughed, and ate far too much food. For the first time, I didn't feel torn between two worlds. I felt like I was in the middle of something beautiful, something that wasn't perfect but was more than enough. As I looked around the table at my two families, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. This wasn't how I had imagined my life would turn out, but in many ways, it was better than anything I could have dreamed. I had two families who loved me, who were trying their best to make this work, and who were willing to take things one step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I wasn't broken. I wasn't torn. I was whole. It was a long journey, one that was filled with pain, confusion, and heartache. But it was also a journey that led me to a place where I could embrace the love of both my adoptive parents and my biological parents. I had learned that family didn't have to be perfect to be meaningful, and that love didn't have to be exclusive to be real. It was enough, and maybe, just maybe, that was all I really needed.